Vera Renci, Romanian serial killer nicknamed the Black Widow, convicted of killing 35 men through arsenic poisoning, but confessed to only killing 32 victims. Renci is the world's most prolific female serial killer. However, there is very little information about Renci and her crimes because personal information, criminal history, academic records, etc., were not catalogued as well as they are today, making some criminologists believe she was a figure of Romanian folklore rather than an actual person. Clementine Barnabet, an axe-murdering voodoo priestess who murdered African-American families at nighttime. Cedric Maaki, known as the Wemerpan Killer and Hammer Killer, he killed his victims with different instruments such as guns, rocks, a knife, and a hammer. Authorities attributed the murders to two serial killers because of the inconsistent modus operandi. In some cases, he killed his victims with a rock, in others he shot them, and in others he murdered tailors with a hammer. Maaki was arrested after Moses Sitole was found guilty of 38 killings and sentenced to 1,340 years in prison. Haj Mohammed Mesfui, known as Marrakesh Arch Killer, drugged, mutilated, and murdered women, executed 1906. Ted Bundy, American serial killer known for his charisma and good looks. Bundy officially confessed to 30 homicides, but had confessed to killing 35 to 36 women in the past, and some estimates run upwards of 100 or more. Infamous for escaping from prison twice and murdering multiple victims in one day, sometimes abducting women from the same location within hours of one another, he was executed by electric chair in 1989. Moses Sitole, known as South Africa's Ted Bundy, preyed on unemployed women, posing as a businessman and luring his victims with the prospects of a job before leading them to an isolated place where he raped, tortured, and murdered them. Sentenced to 2,410 years imprisonment with a non-parole period of 930 years. Tiago Henrique Gomes da Rocha, Brazilian security guard who confessed to the murders of 39 people, attempted suicide in prison, sentenced to 25 years. Raman Raghav. In the late 1960s, Raman Raghav went on a violent rampage in Mumbai, India. He bludgeoned 41 people to death inside their huts while they slept. Karl Denke killed and cannibalized poor travelers and homeless vagrants, kept a ledger recording his murders with at least 31 names in it, including Vincennes Olivier, his only surviving victim, thus confirming at least 30 victims. But due to the massive amount of human remains in his apartment, his kill count is suspected by many to exceed 42 victims. Committed suicide by hanging himself in his holding cell before he could be tried. Francisco das Chagas Rodriguez de Brito, pedophile who sexually abused, murdered, and mutilated children in Marajao and Pará, sentenced to 217 years in prison. David Thabo Similane, sexually assaulted women he befriended in forests, stabbing or strangling them afterward, sentenced to death. Willie Picton, nicknamed the Butcher, Robert Picton was a Canadian serial killer who killed 49 women and disposed of their bodies by feeding them to his pigs. He was convicted of only 6 murders, but charged for his proven 49 victims. Unfortunately, much to the anger of the victims' families, the remaining 43 charges were stayed or dropped. Floresvaldo de Oliveira, known as Cabo Bruno, former police officer and vigilante who murdered criminals in the outskirts of Sao Paulo, murdered by unknown assailants in 2012. Anatoly Onoprienko, known as the Beast of Ukraine, the Terminator, and Citizen O, convicted of the murders of 9 people in 1989 and 43 people in 1995 to 1996, traveled throughout Europe illegally from 1990 to 1995. Whether he killed during this time is unknown. Sentenced to death, later commuted to imprisonment for life. Died from heart failure in 2013. Gennady Mikhasevic strangled women. Besides killing, he also robbed his victims of money and valuable items that he would sometimes give to his wife as a gift. Executed by firing squad in 1987. Andrei Chikatilo, known as the Butcher of Rostov, the Red Ripper, or the Rostov Ripper, convicted of the murder of 53 women and children between 1978 and 1990. One man was previously convicted and executed for his first murder, executed by gunshot in 1994. Alexander Pikushkin, known as the Chessboard Killer, convicted of murdering 48 victims and suspected of killing 60. Claimed to have murdered 62 people because he did not know that 2 of his victims had survived. Stated goal of becoming Russia's most prolific serial killer. Sentenced to imprisonment for life. Wang Qiang killed 45 and raped 10 from 1995 to 2003. Executed in 2005. Yang Xin-hai, known as the Monster Killer, would enter victims' homes at night and kill using axes, meat cleavers, hammers, and shovels. Executed by gunshot in 2004. Kampatimar Shankaria. This mysterious Indian serial killer used a hammer to kill over 70 men and women between 1978 and 1979. His last words were, "I have murdered in vain," he declared. "Nobody should become like me." Ahmad Siraji, convicted of strangling at least 42 women and girls in a series of ritual slayings he believed would give him magical powers. Executed by firing squad in 2008. Mikhail Popkov, serial rapist killer nicknamed the Werewolf, who was active for 2 decades in Ankarsk, Irkutsk, and Vladivostok. After being convicted of 22 murders in 2015, he confessed to an additional 59 murders, of which he was convicted of 56 in 2018. Gary Ridgway, truck painter who confessed to killing 71 women, also known as the Green River Killer. He almost exclusively targeted sex workers from Seattle. Suspected of killing over 90 victims, confessed to 71, convicted of 49, sentenced to life without parole. Samuel Little was convicted of killing 3 women, but later investigations linked 31 other murders to him. Little is now thought to be America's most prolific serial killer. He claims he killed as many as 93 victims total, 3 above his initial confession of 90. The FBI later confirmed a total of 50 murders linked to Little. The investigations into his crimes are ongoing. Javed Iqbal, child murderer and rapist, known as Kukri. Iqbal murdered 100 street children by strangling them and covering up his crimes by dissolving the bodies with acid. He was arrested in 1999 thanks to a letter he sent to a newspaper and was set to be executed in the manner described by the judge, who stated, "You will be strangled to death in front of the parents whose children you killed. Your body will then be cut into 100 pieces and put in acid, the same way you killed the children." However, he died in custody before he could be executed. Pedro Rodriguez Filho. He claimed to have killed over 100 victims, 47 of them inmates. He also killed his father and ate a piece of his heart. He killed his first 2 victims at the age of 14. He was first arrested in 1973, convicted and sentenced to 128 years, but the maximum one can serve in Brazil is 30 years. Serhiy Tkach, a former Ukrainian police criminal investigator, suffocated girls aged between 8 and 18 and performed sexual acts on their bodies after they were dead. Claims to have killed 100, sentenced to imprisonment for life, died from heart failure in 2018. Fernando Hernandez Leyva confessed to 100 murders and 6 kidnappings at the time of his arrest in 1999. He had been arrested previously in 1982 and 1986, the second time for murder, but escaped from prison. But later retracted and claimed that he had been beaten by the police and his family threatened in order to force him to confess. Accused of as many as 137 murders in 5 southern Mexican states, convicted of 33 murders and sentenced 50 years in prison. Tried unsuccessfully to kill himself in prison. If his claim of 100 victims were true, then Leiva would be one of the world's worst murderers. Currently, he is Mexico's worst documented serial killer. Daniel Camargo Barbosa, child and woman murderer, believed to have possibly raped and killed over 150 victims, primarily targeting female children, as they were more likely to be virgins. Confessed to killing 72 victims, he strangled young girls in Colombia and was arrested, but he escaped from prison and he started killing in Ecuador. Rearrested in 1986, he was incarcerated in the same Ecuadorian prison as 300 serial killer Pedro Lopez. Citation is needed. Camargo was killed in jail by the nephew of one of his victims. Luis Garavito, child murderer, torture killer, and rapist known as La Bestia, or the Beast. Confessed to killing 140 boys between 8 and 16 years old over a 7-year period in Colombia and neighboring countries. He is suspected of murdering over 300 victims, mostly street children. Pedro Lopez, child murderer and rapist, known as the Monster of the Andes, targeted young girls between the ages of 8 and 12, arrested in 1980 and convicted in 1983 of killing 3 young girls, but claimed to have killed hundreds. Despite being believed to be one of the most prolific serial killers of the 20th century, he was released in the late 1990s.